A note to the reader. This book was written for people who know, in some deep, quiet, honest part of themselves, that they are capable of more. Not more in the abstract, motivational poster sense, but more in the specific, daily, real-life sense. More aliveness, more contribution, more alignment between who they are inside and what they are building outside. If that describes you, you are in the right place. What follows is not a set of techniques for getting more. It is a guide to becoming more and allowing the getting to follow naturally from the becoming. Read slowly. Mark what resonates. Come back to what challenges you. The giant wakes up at the pace of genuine honesty, and there is no better pace than that. Why this book exists, and why now? We are living in a paradox. By almost every objective measure of human capability, resource availability, and connectivity, the average person alive in America today has access to more tools, more information, more opportunity, and more potential for meaningful contribution than any generation that has come before. The Internet has flattened barriers to knowledge that once required decades and considerable wealth to overcome. Communication technology has connected 7 billion minds in ways that would have seemed like science fiction 2 generations ago. Medical advances have extended human lifespan and vitality. The legal and social changes of the past century have opened doors that were categorically closed to entire segments of the population. The infrastructure for human flourishing has never been more robust, and yet, by the equally objective measures of meaning, fulfillment, and felt potential, we are facing a crisis that is at least as serious as any of the physical challenges on our collective agenda. Rates of anxiety, depression, and what researchers now call deaths of despair have risen steadily for decades. Studies consistently show that the majority of Americans feel disengaged from their work, disconnected in their relationships, and uncertain about their sense of purpose. A significant percentage of people, when asked whether they believe they are living up to their real potential, answer no, often with an expression that suggests they have made a kind of quiet peace with that answer. This book is an argument that the peace should not be made, not because suffering is necessary or because discontent for its own sake is virtuous, but because the quiet resignation to a smaller life than you are capable of is genuinely costly to you, to the people around you, and to a world that needs what you specifically have to offer. I have spent years working with people who are, by most conventional measures, doing fine. They have jobs, families, homes, and enough. But doing fine is not the same as being fully alive, and the gap between fine and fully alive is the territory this book is designed to help you navigate. The title of this book, Awaken the Sleeping Giant, is not a metaphor for unlocking some hidden, superhuman version of yourself that bears no resemblance to your actual life. The sleeping giant is not a fantasy. It is the version of you that operates from your full cognitive capacity, your genuine emotional depth, your actual values, your real gifts, and your true purpose, rather than from the compressed, defended, fear-managed version that most of us have learned to present to the world. That compressed version has its reasons. It developed in response to real experiences. It protected you from genuine risks at genuine moments in your history. The work of this book is not to attack or shame that version of yourself. It is to understand how it was formed, to recognize which of its protections no longer serve you, and to develop, through honest and deliberate daily practice, the expanded version that has been waiting beneath it. This book is organized around 5 core transformations, each addressed in its own chapter. The first is awareness, the foundational recognition that your current life is a reflection of your current programming, not your permanent potential. The second is belief, the deep investigation of the invisible convictions that have been quietly running your decisions and shaping your results. The third is identity, the understanding that lasting behavioral change follows identity change, not the other way around. The fourth is purpose, the discovery and development of your specific, genuine direction, and the way that direction converts inner transformation into outer results. The fifth is practice, the daily disciplines that keep all four of the previous transformations active, deepening, and effective. Each chapter builds on the previous ones. The architecture is intentional. Do not skip to the chapter that interests you most, at least not on the first reading. The foundation of Chapter 1 makes Chapter 2 more effective. The work of Chapter 2 makes Chapter 3 possible. The understanding developed in Chapters 1 through 3 makes Chapter 4 genuinely actionable rather than merely aspirational. And the practice designed in Chapter 5 only works when it is built on the foundation of the 4 preceding chapters. A word about what to expect. This book will challenge you. Not in the way that challenges are sometimes deployed in personal development contexts, as a kind of motivational theater designed to make you feel temporarily uncomfortable before reassuring you that everything is going to be fine. It will challenge you in the way that real investigation always challenges, by asking you to look honestly at things that are easier to avoid, to sit with questions that do not have immediate comfortable answers, and to consider the possibility that some of the most important truths about your life are located precisely in the places you have been most reluctant to look. That discomfort is not the enemy of the work. It is the texture of the work. And if you are willing to stay with it, to not close the book or dismiss the difficult questions when they arise, you will find, on the other side of the discomfort, something that is very difficult to manufacture artificially and very easy to recognize when it is genuine: clarity. The kind of clarity that does not need to shout to be heard. The kind that simply orients you, quietly and permanently, toward the life you actually have the capacity to live. The sleeping giant is patient. It has been waiting, after all, for quite a long time. It can wait a little longer while you finish this introduction and turn to the first chapter. But it is ready. It has always been ready. The question now is whether you are. The giant you never knew was sleeping. Let me ask you something you have probably never been asked before. What if the life you are living right now, the income, the relationships, the body, the opportunities, the frustrations, is not the result of your effort, your talent, or your circumstances? What if it is simply the result of a story your mind decided to believe before you were old enough to question it? Before you dismiss that idea, stay with it for a moment, because what I am about to share with you is not a motivational speech. It is not a collection of feel-good quotes dressed up in a book cover. What you are holding is a map, a precise, honest, and sometimes uncomfortable map of the invisible architecture that has been quietly running your life since the day you were born. Most people in America today are living at a fraction of their actual capacity, not because they are lazy, not because they lack intelligence or opportunity, but because somewhere deep inside the operating system of their mind, a program is running that was written by someone else, by their parents, their teachers, their environment, their early fears. And nobody ever told them they had the power to rewrite it. That program is the sleeping giant, and it has been sleeping inside you for years. Think about the moments in your life when you surprised yourself, when you accomplished something that felt almost impossible, when you pushed through a wall that seemed permanent, when you said the right words at exactly the right time, or made a decision that changed the entire direction of your story. In those moments, you caught a glimpse of something larger than the version of yourself you carry around every day. You saw the giant stir. But then, almost immediately, the familiar voice returned. The voice that says you got lucky, that it was a fluke, that you cannot sustain that level, that the real you is the one who struggles, the one who holds back, the one who plays it safe. And just like that, the giant went back to sleep. This book is about waking it up for good. I want to be direct with you from the very first page. The reason most self-help approaches fail is not because the information is wrong. It is because they target the surface layer of a human being. They give you new habits without changing the beliefs that make those habits feel unnatural. They teach you goal setting without dismantling the subconscious conviction that you do not deserve the goal. They hand you a ladder, but leave the ceiling intact. What we are going to do together in these pages goes much deeper. We are going to travel into the architecture of the mind itself, into the beliefs, the emotional patterns, the identity narratives, and the invisible loyalties that determine your results long before you ever take a single action. Because here is the truth that changes everything. Your actions are the last thing that shapes your life. Your beliefs shape your actions. Your identity shapes your beliefs. And your earliest experiences shape your identity. To change your results permanently, you have to start at the root. There is a man named Marcus who grew up in a 2-bedroom apartment in Detroit. His mother worked double shifts at a hospital. His father left when Marcus was 6, and by the time he was 12, the message was already deeply embedded. Life is hard, money is scarce, and survival is the highest ambition. Marcus was not told these things directly. He absorbed them the way a sponge absorbs water, quietly, completely, and without knowing it was happening. By the time Marcus reached 34, he had cycled through 7 jobs, 2 failed businesses, and a marriage that ended under the weight of financial stress. He was not a bad person. He was not unintelligent. In fact, everyone who knew him remarked on his brilliance. But every time an opportunity appeared, something inside him would find a reason to retreat. A contract fell through at the last moment. An investor pulled out after weeks of promising meetings. A promotion went to someone less qualified. From the outside, it looked like bad luck. From the inside, it felt like proof. The world was confirming what he had always suspected about himself. What Marcus did not yet understand was that he was not experiencing the world. He was experiencing his beliefs about the world, projected outward like a film onto a screen. The screen was called reality, but the film was called memory. And until he changed the film, no amount of effort was going to change the picture. Marcus's story is not unique. Walk into any city in America, and you will find thousands of people living variations of the same pattern. Brilliant, capable, often deeply motivated individuals whose internal architecture is quietly blocking every door they try to open. The tragedy is not that life is hard. The tragedy is that most of them will never find out why. But you are reading this book, which means something in you already knows there is a door that has not been opened yet. Here is what the science of the mind now confirms, and what ancient wisdom traditions have always known. The human brain is not a fixed instrument. It is a dynamic, responsive, endlessly adaptable system that reshapes itself continuously in response to what you repeatedly think, feel, and believe. This is the concept known today as neuroplasticity, and it is one of the most exciting and actionable discoveries in modern neuroscience. What this means practically is that no belief is permanent, no pattern is irreversible, no identity is final. The architecture that has been limiting you is not made of stone. It is made of neural connections, electrochemical pathways in your brain that were formed through repetition and emotion, and that can be reformed through the same process. The sleeping giant is not gone. It is simply buried under layers of repeated thought, and every layer can be removed. But before we can remove those layers, we need to understand what they are made of. And that begins with a concept that most people find uncomfortable when they first encounter it: the subconscious belief system. Right now, as you read these words, approximately 95% of your mental activity is happening below the threshold of your conscious awareness. Your subconscious mind is processing sensory information, regulating your body, filtering incoming data, and most critically, running the deep programs that determine how you respond to money, relationships, risk, success, failure, and your own sense of worth. You are conscious of perhaps 5% of what your mind is actually doing. This is not a problem in itself. In fact, it is an elegant design. The subconscious mind allows you to function without having to consciously manage every detail of your experience. The problem arises when the programs running in that 95% were written in childhood under conditions of fear, confusion, or limitation, and they have never been updated. Think of it like a smartphone that is still running an operating system from 20 years ago. No matter how many new apps you try to install, no matter how fast the new processors become, the underlying operating system cannot support them. The apps crash, the phone freezes, the battery drains for no apparent reason. You keep blaming the new apps when the real issue is the operating system buried underneath. Your subconscious beliefs are that operating system, and upgrading them is precisely what this book is designed to help you do. Over the following chapters, we will move through 5 transformations. In this first chapter, we have been establishing the foundation, the understanding that your current life is a reflection of your current programming, not a reflection of your permanent potential. In Chapter 2, we will go deep into the mechanics of belief, where limiting beliefs come from, how they operate, and what it feels like from the inside when they are running the show. In Chapter 3, we will explore the power of identity, because the fastest way to change your behavior is not to change your habits, it is to change who you believe you are. In Chapter 4, we will work with purpose and direction, the force that converts inner transformation into outer results. And in Chapter 5, we will bring everything together into a daily practice, a set of disciplines and awarenesses that keep the giant awake and growing. This is not a book you read once and put on a shelf. It is a book you work with. There are moments in these pages that are going to challenge you, moments that will ask you to sit with discomfort, to question stories you have held for decades, to consider the possibility that the person you have believed yourself to be is simply the most recent version, not the final one. Those moments are not obstacles. They are the doors back to Marcus. At the age of 37, after a period of genuine desperation, the kind that comes when a person has tried everything and still feels stuck, Marcus came across a single idea that changed the trajectory of his life. Not a technique, not a strategy, not a hack, an idea. The idea was this: the pain he kept experiencing was not coming from the outside world, it was coming from the inside. And if it was coming from the inside, it could be changed from the inside. That idea sounds simple. But for Marcus, a man who had spent his entire life treating the external world as the problem, it was a revolution. He did not become wealthy overnight. He did not suddenly have everything figured out. But something fundamentally shifted in the relationship between who he was and what he believed was possible for him. And over the following 2 years, the outer world began, slowly, then all at once, to reflect that inner shift. Not because the world changed, because Marcus changed the lens through which he was seeing it. That is what this book is offering you. Not a better strategy for working harder at the same game, a completely new game. The sleeping giant inside you is not a metaphor. It is the version of you that exists when the layers of fear, limitation, and inherited belief have been removed. It is the you that knows, without needing external confirmation, that you are enough, that abundance is your natural state, that your purpose is real and reachable, and that the future is not something that happens to you, but something you participate in creating. That version of you has always been there, waiting, breathing, patient. It is time to wake it up. Before we move into the next chapter, I want you to do something. Not a complicated exercise, just a moment of honest reflection. Ask yourself, where in my life am I producing results that feel smaller than what I know I am capable of? Where am I repeating a cycle that I have tried to break but keep returning to? Where does the effort feel like pushing against something that never moves? Hold those places in your mind. Do not judge them. Do not explain them away. Just notice them, because those are the exact locations where the sleeping giant is most eager to be awakened. I want to spend a few more moments on something that I find people either overlook completely or underestimate when they first begin this kind of inner work. And that is the extraordinary cost of leaving the giant asleep, not the moral cost. The practical, day-to-day, this is your actual life cost. When you are operating from a fraction of your real capacity, when the limiting programs are running the show unchallenged, you are spending enormous energy on things that have nothing to do with your goals. You are spending energy managing fear, rationalizing why now is not the right time, constructing elaborate narratives that explain why your lack of results is someone else's fault, or the economy's fault, or bad timing's fault. You are spending energy maintaining the small version of yourself, which turns out to be surprisingly expensive. The armor of limitation requires constant upkeep. Consider for a moment what that energy could do if it were redirected. The same person who spends years managing the anxiety of feeling stuck could, with that same energy properly oriented, build something extraordinary. The same intelligence that goes into constructing detailed explanations for why the breakthrough has not arrived could, turned outward, solve genuine problems and create genuine value. The fuel is not the issue, the direction is. This is one of the first things I ask people to genuinely reckon with when they begin this work, the opportunity cost of staying asleep. Because the sleeping giant is not neutral. It does not simply wait passively. It costs you, daily, in ways both visible and invisible, to keep it contained. The containment requires effort, and that effort is effort that is not going toward your life. There is also the question of what your example costs the people around you. This is something most people in the personal development space do not talk about because it feels uncomfortable, but I believe it is important. The way you live, the degree to which you inhabit your full potential, is a living transmission to everyone in your orbit, your children, your colleagues, your friends, your community. When you are operating from scarcity, from fear, from the compressed version of yourself, that is the model you are providing. When you break through, when the giant wakes and begins to move, that becomes the model instead, and models change lives. Marcus, the man from Detroit whose story opened this chapter, has a 12-year-old daughter named Maya. Maya has watched her father transform over the past several years. She has watched him move from a man who explained his limitations to a man who explores his possibilities. She cannot fully articulate what she has witnessed, but it is inside her now, a reference point, a proof of concept, a living answer to the question that will eventually arise in her own mind. Is transformation actually possible, or is it just something people talk about? She already has her answer, and her answer will shape the life she builds. The stakes of this work are higher than they first appear. They always are. The journey begins now, and it begins exactly where you are. The architecture of belief, how the invisible runs your life. In the summer of 1987, a clinical psychologist named Dr. Ellen Hartley was working with a patient who could not understand why her career kept stalling. This woman, we will call her Diana, was educated at one of the top universities in the country, had a resume that would make most professionals envious, and was universally regarded by colleagues as one of the most talented people in her field. Yet every time a significant promotion appeared on the horizon, something went wrong. A project faltered at the critical moment. A presentation was derailed by an unexpected conflict. An opportunity evaporated before she could reach for it. Diana had tried everything. She hired coaches, she attended workshops, she changed companies. 3 times. She read every business book her local bookstore carried. Nothing worked. The pattern persisted with clockwork consistency, as if some invisible hand was gently but firmly closing every door she tried to walk through. In one session, Dr. Hartley asked Diana to close her eyes and imagine herself receiving the promotion. The big one, the one she had been working toward for years. "Really see it," she said. "Feel the handshake. Hear the congratulations. Step into it as if it were real." Diana tried, and within 15 seconds, her face changed. Her breathing tightened. Her hands gripped the armrests of the chair. When she opened her eyes, they were filled with something that had nothing to do with success. "What happened?" Dr. Hartley asked. "I felt terrified," Diana said. "Not excited, terrified." That moment was the turning point, not because terror was a sign of weakness, but because it was a signal pointing directly at a belief that had been running silently in the background of Diana's entire professional life, a belief that sounded something like this: "If I become too successful, I will lose the people I love. I will be seen as threatening. I will be alone." Where did that belief come from? As it turned out, it came from something that happened when Diana was 9 years old. Her father, a man she adored, had been passed over for a major promotion at his company. The colleague who received it instead was subsequently treated with resentment and distance by the other employees, including Diana's father. The message her 9-year-old mind had recorded with no conscious intention was simple and indelible. Success costs you belonging. Being too good means being left out. She had been protecting herself from that loss ever since, without ever knowing she was doing it. This is the architecture of belief. It is not rational, it is not logical, it does not respond to argument or to willpower. It operates beneath those layers entirely, in a part of the mind that was formed long before the ability to reason had fully developed. And it shapes behavior with a consistency and precision that the conscious mind cannot match. Understanding this architecture is one of the most powerful things a human being can do, not because understanding is the same as healing, but because awareness is the precondition for everything that follows. You cannot change what you cannot see, and most people are living inside belief systems they have never once examined. Let us talk about where beliefs come from, because this is foundational to everything else in this book. The human brain undergoes its most formative period of development between birth and approximately age 7. During this period, the brain is operating primarily in what neuroscientists call a theta brainwave state, the same state that adults enter during deep hypnosis or just before falling asleep. In this state, the critical filtering mechanism of the conscious mind is not yet fully active. The brain is, in a very real sense, a wide-open recording device. Everything that happens during these early years, the tone of voice your parents used, the words spoken around money, the way conflict was handled, the expressions on the faces of the adults in your environment, the emotional atmosphere of your home, All of it is recorded directly into the subconscious mind without filtering, without context, and without the ability to evaluate whether what is being absorbed is true or useful. This is not a flaw. It is how children survive and adapt. The infant brain needs to download the operating rules of its environment as quickly as possible. The problem, again, is that the operating rules of most early environments include a significant number of limitations: fear-based beliefs, scarcity thinking, unresolved traumas, that the child absorbs as absolute truth, often because the adults who carry them do not know they are transmitting them. By the time you reach the age of 7, the foundational architecture of your belief system was largely in place. Every experience since then, school, relationships, work, success, failure, love, loss, has been interpreted through that architecture. Not because the architecture is correct, because it is familiar, because the mind, above all else, seeks consistency between what it expects and what it experiences. This is why behavioral change is so difficult. It is not a motivation problem. It is not a discipline problem. It is an identity coherence problem. The subconscious mind is not trying to sabotage you. It is trying to protect the self-image it was given. When you attempt to behave in ways that are inconsistent with that self-image, when you try to earn more than you subconsciously believe you deserve, or build relationships more loving than the ones you were modeled, or achieve goals larger than your self-concept can accommodate, the subconscious will generate resistance. It will create doubt, procrastination, fear, distraction, self-sabotage, not out of malice, out of loyalty to the story it was told. The great news is that this story is not the truth about who you are. It is the first draft, and every first draft can be rewritten. There are 3 categories of limiting beliefs that I see most consistently in people who feel trapped in cycles of underperformance, and understanding them will help you recognize which ones may be operating in your own architecture. The first category is beliefs about worthiness. These are the deep convictions, often invisible, that determine how much good you allow yourself to receive. They sound like, "I do not deserve success unless I have suffered enough to earn it. Good things happen to other people, not to me. I have to work twice as hard to be considered half as good. Wanting more is selfish." These beliefs act as an internal ceiling. No matter how high you climb on the outside, the ceiling will eventually make itself known, usually in the form of a crisis, a self-destructive choice, or an inexplicable retreat from success. The second category is beliefs about safety. These beliefs exist to protect you from perceived threats that were real or imagined in your past, but that no longer apply to your present. They sound like, "Success makes me a target. Standing out means getting hurt. If people really knew me, they would not respect me. Change is dangerous." These beliefs generate a powerful subconscious preference for the familiar over the fulfilling, the comfortable over the expansive. The third category is beliefs about identity. These are the most foundational beliefs of all because they are not about what you can do or what you deserve. They are about who you are. They sound like, "I am not the kind of person who succeeds at things like this. I am too old, too young, too damaged, too late. People like me do not get opportunities like that." These beliefs are self-fulfilling in the most precise possible sense. What you believe about who you are determines which experiences you move toward, which you avoid, which you interpret as confirmation of your story, and which you dismiss. All 3 categories share a common feature. They are not facts. They are conclusions. Conclusions drawn by a younger, less resourced version of you from an incomplete and often distorted set of data, and they have been running as if they were permanent laws of the universe ever since. Here is something that most people find simultaneously disturbing and liberating when they first encounter it. The world is not responding to your actions. It is responding to your energy, and your energy is a direct expression of your beliefs. This is not mysticism. This is basic behavioral science. When you believe you are worthy, you carry yourself differently. You speak with different confidence. You make eye contact in a different way. You take risks that produce different results. You interpret setbacks differently, as information rather than proof. You attract different people, different conversations, different opportunities. Not because the universe is rewarding your vibration, but because human beings are extraordinarily sensitive to the invisible signals that other human beings emit through posture, tone, word choice, presence, and emotional availability. The person who believes they are worth listening to is listened to. The person who believes their work is valuable prices it accordingly and finds customers who agree. The person who believes relationships can be safe creates the conditions for safety. Not always, not perfectly, but with a statistical consistency that, over years and decades, creates what looks from the outside like luck and is actually something far more interesting. I want to introduce you to a framework I call the belief identity reality loop, a cycle that is constantly operating in every human life and that will become central to everything we work on in this book. The loop works like this. Your beliefs determine how you perceive the world. Your perception determines what actions feel available to you and what actions feel dangerous, unrealistic, or unworthy of your time. Those actions produce results, and your mind interprets those results as evidence that confirms your original beliefs. The loop then reinforces itself and begins again, tighter and more automatic each time. When the loop is running on positive, expansive beliefs, it generates an upward spiral. Small successes build confidence, confidence opens perception, expanded perception reveals more options, better actions produce better results, and the loop feeds itself upward. This is what people from the outside call talent, momentum, or being in the zone. From the inside, it is the experience of the sleeping giant being awake. When the loop is running on limiting beliefs, it generates a downward spiral, or more accurately, a horizontal trap. The person tries hard, fails to achieve what they know they are capable of, interprets the failure as evidence of their limitation, reinforces the limiting belief, and repeats the cycle. Not because they lack effort, because the loop is closed. Breaking the loop requires intervention at the level of belief, which is exactly what the remaining chapters of this book are designed to provide. But before we can intervene, we need one more piece of the foundation: the understanding that beliefs do not change through argument or information alone. They change through new emotional experiences. This is critical. You can read every book ever written about abundance, success, and human potential. You can attend every seminar. You can write your goals down every morning. And none of it will produce lasting change unless, at some point, the new information produces a new feeling, a felt sense in the body that the new belief is real, is safe, and is yours. This is why the work we are doing in this book is not primarily intellectual, it is experiential. It is about creating the conditions under which new beliefs can be genuinely felt, not just understood, and therefore genuinely installed in the operating system where the real decisions are made. Diana, the woman I described at the beginning of this chapter, did not change her career by understanding her limiting belief about success and belonging. She changed it by spending weeks doing a very specific inner work, revisiting the original experience of watching her father be isolated after his colleague's promotion, reinterpreting what had actually happened, recognizing that the conclusion her 9-year-old mind had drawn was incomplete, and then, through guided emotional processing, creating new reference experiences in which success and belonging coexisted, not as a fantasy, as a felt reality. Within 8 months, Diana received the promotion, not because she worked harder, because she stopped working against herself. The sleeping giant does not need more effort to wake up, it needs less resistance, and resistance lives in the architecture of belief. In the next chapter, we are going to take this understanding one level deeper, into the territory of identity itself. Because while beliefs are the building blocks of your experience, identity is the architect, and when you change the architect, everything the architect builds changes with it. In the next chapter, we are going to take this understanding one level deeper, into the territory of identity itself. Because while beliefs are the building blocks of your experience, identity is the architect, and when you change the architect, everything the architect builds changes with it. Before you turn the page, I want you to consider one question with total honesty, not to judge yourself and not to fix anything, just to see clearly. The question is this: what is the belief that, if it turned out to be completely wrong, would change everything about how you approach your own life? That belief, the one that just surfaced as you read that question, is worth keeping close as we continue. It is pointing at something important. It is pointing at the giant. One more thing I want to leave you with before we move forward, because it is easy to read about limiting beliefs and immediately begin a kind of internal prosecution, cataloging your flaws, tallying your limitations, building a case against yourself for all the ways you have failed to overcome what is now revealed as solvable. Do not do this. It is the most counterproductive response possible to the material in this chapter, and it is also one of the most common. Limiting beliefs are not character flaws. They are survival adaptations that have outlived their usefulness. Every single limiting belief in your operating system was installed in response to a real experience, a real risk, or a real message from a real person whose own programming was also installed by experiences before they had any choice in the matter. The chain of inherited limitation stretches back through generations, and nowhere in that chain is there a villain. There are only people doing their best with the operating system they were given and unintentionally passing some of its bugs along. The compassion you would naturally feel for a child who had to develop these protective beliefs, because that is exactly what happened, is the compassion you are invited to extend to yourself. Not as a self-indulgent sentiment, but as a practical tool, because the research on psychological change is clear. Self-compassion, not self-criticism, is the emotional environment most conducive to genuine transformation. The giant does not wake up under the lash of self-judgment. It wakes up in the warmth of honest, compassionate examination. Be gentle with what you find, and be willing to look. The identity revolution, becoming the person who has what you want. Here is a question that sounds simple but contains one of the most transformative ideas in this entire book. Are you trying to change what you do, or are you trying to change who you are? If you are like most people, if you are like I was for a long period of my own life, your answer is probably the first one. You are trying to change what you do. You are trying to eat differently, save more, work harder, communicate better, show up more consistently, procrastinate less, take bigger risks. You are trying to change the behaviors. And here is what I know to be true about that approach after years of watching people try it and watching them struggle. It rarely works in a lasting way, not because the behaviors themselves are wrong to pursue, but because you are treating the symptom without treating the source. The source is identity. Identity is the deep, mostly unconscious answer to the question, who am I? It is not what you say when someone asks you to describe yourself. It is not your job title or your family role or your list of accomplishments. It is the quiet, private, foundational conviction about the kind of person you fundamentally are, and it runs every single one of your behaviors without asking for permission. Here is why this matters. The human mind is, at its core, a consistency-seeking machine. It does not like gaps between who it believes you are and how you behave. When those gaps appear, it generates what psychologists call cognitive dissonance, a deeply uncomfortable internal pressure that motivates action to close the gap. And here is the crucial part. The gap almost always closes in the direction of identity, not behavior. The behavior changes back to match the identity, not the other way around. This is why the person who loses 50 pounds on a diet almost always gains it back, not because they were not committed, not because they lacked information, because their identity, the deep internal conviction of the kind of person they are, never changed. They were a heavy person who was dieting, and eventually, inevitably, the mind engineered their return to the behaviors of the person they still believed themselves to be. This is why the person who receives a financial windfall and has no experience or identity as someone who builds wealth will typically return to their previous financial condition within a few years. This is well documented. Lottery winners, professional athletes who retire without financial education, people who inherit money without the corresponding inner architecture. The pattern repeats with remarkable consistency. The money changes. The identity does not. And money flows toward identity. This is why you can give someone every tool, strategy, and resource they need to succeed, and watch them fail to use any of it. Not because the tools are wrong, because the person has not yet become who they need to be to use them. The revolution, and I use that word intentionally, is to stop trying to change your behaviors from the outside in and start changing your identity from the inside out. This is the shift that changes everything. This is what waking the sleeping giant actually means at the practical level. It means developing, through deliberate work, a new answer to the question, "Who am I?" and then allowing every behavior, every decision, and every result to reorganize itself around that new answer. I want to tell you about a young woman named Simone who grew up in rural Mississippi, the first in her family to attend a 4-year university. Simone was extraordinarily smart. Her professors said so, her test scores confirmed it, but she struggled with a persistent and crippling sense of not belonging. Every time she sat in a class at her university, a quiet but relentless voice in the back of her mind repeated the same message. You are not really one of these people. You got here by accident. Eventually, they will figure it out. This voice, which psychologists now call imposter syndrome, is not a character flaw. It is an identity mismatch. Simone's behaviors were those of a successful student, but her identity, her deep private sense of who she fundamentally was, had not yet expanded to include successful student as a genuine, permanent descriptor of herself. She was acting the part without yet having become the character. The result was exhausting and self-limiting in ways that affected every area of her life. She avoided putting her name forward for prestigious opportunities because she was afraid that applying would expose the fraud she believed herself to be. She spent enormous energy performing competence rather than developing it. She sabotaged 2 significant relationships because she could not reconcile receiving genuine love with the self-image she was carrying. What finally changed things for Simone was not a new study strategy or a better social script. It was a single conversation with a mentor, an older professor who had grown up in almost identical circumstances, who said something so simple that Simone almost dismissed it. He said, "The people you think you are not like, most of them feel the same way you do." The difference between them and you is not that they feel more legitimate. It is that they have decided to act as if they belong, until belonging feels true. You do not earn your place by first feeling worthy. You feel worthy by first claiming your place. That was the identity shift, not a belief change, not a behavioral change, an identity declaration. I belong here. I am one of these people. This is mine. It sounds almost too simple. And yet, the research on identity-based change consistently shows that the most durable transformations begin with exactly this kind of declaration, a moment in which the person, often without full certainty, chooses to identify as the person they are becoming rather than the person they have been. The psychologist William James, widely considered the father of American psychology, wrote that the greatest revolution of our generation is the discovery that human beings, by changing the inner attitudes of their minds, can change the outer aspects of their lives. He wrote that in 1890. More than 100 years of research since then has not diminished that idea. It has confirmed it. Here is how identity change actually works, broken down into a sequence that you can apply directly to your own life. The first step is articulation. You need to be able to state clearly and specifically who you are becoming, not who you want to be, not who you will be someday, who you are becoming. Present tense, active, ongoing. I am becoming a person who builds wealth deliberately. I am becoming a person who maintains my health as a form of self-respect. I am becoming a person who shows up fully in relationships. The language matters. It is directional without being dishonest. It acknowledges movement without requiring that the destination already be reached. The second step is evidence gathering. The mind requires evidence to update its self-image. Left to its own devices, it will gather evidence that confirms the old identity. You need to actively redirect its attention toward evidence that confirms the new one. This means noticing, deliberately, specifically, consistently, every instance in which you behave in ways that are consistent with your emerging identity. Every time you choose the action the new you would take. Every time you resist the pull of the old pattern. These are not small victories. They are neurological deposits. They are the raw material from which new identity is built. The third step is environment alignment. Your environment is constantly sending you signals about who you are. The people you spend the most time with reflect a self-image back to you. The media you consume tells you what people like you believe and value. The physical spaces you inhabit reinforce certain stories about your place in the world. Identity change is enormously accelerated when you deliberately align your environment with your emerging self-image. This does not always mean dramatic changes. Sometimes it means one new relationship, one new community, one book on your nightstand instead of another. But the signal matters. The fourth step, and this is the one most people skip because it feels too slow, is patience with the process. Identity change does not happen in a weekend. It does not happen in a month. It happens through the patient, consistent daily practice of choosing the behaviors of the person you are becoming and allowing the felt sense of that identity to gradually solidify. Neuroscience tells us that new neural pathways require repetition over time to become the default pathways. There is no shortcut. There is only the practice and the trust that the practice is working even when you cannot yet see the results. Let me give you a concrete example of what this looks like when it is working. A 31-year-old man named Derek, who had struggled with debt for most of his adult life, came to a coaching program I observed with a specific goal. He wanted to be financially free within 5 years. He had tried budgeting apps, financial advisors, Dave Ramsey, the envelope system, every structural approach to money management he could find. Each approach worked for a few weeks. None worked for a few years. The shift happened when Derek stopped asking, "How do I manage money better?" and started asking, "Who is the kind of person who builds wealth?" He spent 2 weeks answering that question in extraordinary detail, not abstractly, specifically. What does this person think about money? How do they talk about it with their family? What do they read? Where do they put their attention? What do they do when they feel the urge to spend impulsively? What is their relationship with discomfort? And then he started doing one small thing every single day that this person would do. Not the whole transformation. One thing. He tracked every dollar, not to restrict himself, but because wealth-building people understand their numbers. He told his wife what he was working toward, not because he had it figured out, but because this identity does not hide from accountability. He put a single book about investing on his nightstand and read 10 pages a night, not because 10 pages would make him rich, but because this identity feeds itself with information. Within 6 months, Derek's relationship with money had fundamentally shifted, not because he had implemented a better system, because he had started to become a different person. The behaviors followed the identity, and the results followed the behaviors. This is the sequence that the sleeping giant operates on. The giant does not need a better plan. It needs a new story about who you are. Give it that story, repeated and reinforced through daily action, and the plan, the right plan, the one that actually fits your life and your gifts, will emerge naturally from the person you are becoming. There is one more dimension of identity that I want to address before we move forward, because it is both underestimated and profoundly powerful. It is the identity you hold in relationship to other people, what might be called your relational identity. How you see yourself in relationship to others, whether you experience yourself as someone who deserves care, respect, and opportunity from the people around you, or whether you experience yourself as someone who must earn every gesture of goodwill through performance, has a direct impact on the quality of every relationship in your life and, through those relationships, on every opportunity that does or does not come your way. The sleeping giant is not a solitary creature. It wakes up in community. The version of you that is fully expressed, fully engaged, and fully alive is also fully connected to the right people in the right ways, with the kind of relational depth that makes collaboration, support, and shared growth possible. If your relational identity is built on unworthiness, if somewhere beneath the surface you believe that you must justify your presence in any room, earn every relationship you are in, and brace yourself for the withdrawal of love and respect at any moment, then the giant cannot fully wake. Because waking requires safety, and safety in its deepest form is relational. We will return to this in Chapter 5. For now, carry this with you as we move forward. The identity revolution is not about becoming someone different. It is about becoming more fully who you already are, underneath the fear, the protective layers, the inherited limitations, and the stories that were given to you before you had the wisdom to evaluate them. The giant is not a stranger. It is you, the you that has always been waiting for the noise to stop and the real work to begin. Before we move to Chapter 4, I want to address one of the most common questions that arises at this point in the work. What do I do when the new identity I am building conflicts with how the people closest to me see me? This is a real and important question. Identity change does not happen in a vacuum. You are embedded in relationships, communities, and social systems that have expectations about who you are. And those expectations exert a constant, often unconscious pressure to remain consistent with the version of you that others have come to know and count on. When you begin to change genuinely, some people will be supportive and encouraging. Others, often people who care about you deeply, will feel uncomfortable. They will push back, sometimes subtly and sometimes overtly. They will make jokes about your new habits, They will express skepticism about your goals. They will remind you, in 100 small ways, of who they believe you to be. This is not malice. It is human nature. When the people around us change, it implicitly invites us to examine our own lack of change, and that examination is uncomfortable. It is much easier to bring the changing person back to the familiar than to be drawn forward by their example. The way through this is not to fight it or to sever relationships prematurely. It is to hold your new identity with a quiet, consistent firmness that requires no performance and no defense. You do not need to convince anyone of who you are becoming. You simply need to continue becoming it. Over time, results speak in a language that no argument can match. And some of the people who pushed back most will eventually be your most enthusiastic supporters, not because they changed their minds intellectually, but because your consistent demonstration of the new identity eventually reorganized their perception of you. Not everyone will make that journey with you. Some relationships are constructed around specific versions of who both parties are, and when one party changes significantly, the relationship must either evolve or dissolve. This is a genuine grief, and it is worth acknowledging as such rather than minimizing. But it is also an inevitable part of genuine growth, and navigating it with honesty, compassion, and clarity is itself an act of the new identity being expressed. The sleeping giant does not need permission from others to wake. It needs permission from you. The power of purpose, the force that turns transformation into results. There is a difference between wanting something and being called by it. Wanting is a surface experience. It responds to external cues, the advertisement, the comparison, the social pressure, the fear of missing out. Wanting is restless, shifting, and fundamentally insecure. It reaches for things, grasps them briefly, and then turns its attention to the next thing, always slightly unsatisfied, always oriented toward what is not yet here. Being called is something different. It is quieter. It does not announce itself through desire or urgency. It announces itself through a persistent sense of rightness, a feeling, sometimes very difficult to articulate, that this particular work, this particular direction, this particular way of contributing to the world is not something you chose so much as something that was always already waiting for you to find. Purpose, the deep, specific, resonant sense of what your life is for, is the difference between those two experiences. And it is, in my observation, the single most transformative force available to a human being who is serious about awakening their full potential, not because purpose is magical, because purpose is directional, and a mind with direction is exponentially more powerful than a mind without one. Let me explain what I mean. The human brain is a prediction machine. It does not simply respond to what is happening. It is constantly generating predictions about what is about to happen and adjusting its responses accordingly. The vast majority of your mental and emotional energy is not directed at the present moment. It is directed at anticipated futures. The question your brain is continuously asking, beneath every thought, beneath every decision, is what comes next. When that question has no compelling answer, when there is no clear, deeply felt sense of direction, the brain defaults to threat detection. It scans the environment for dangers, problems, and reasons to be cautious. It generates anxiety. It narrows perception. It makes the present feel heavy and the future feel threatening. When that question has a compelling answer, when there is a purpose that the brain can orient toward with genuine emotional investment, everything shifts. The threat detection system quiets. Attention narrows in a productive direction. Creative problem-solving activates. Emotional resilience increases. Physical energy follows mental direction. The same brain, in the same body, in the same circumstances, performs at a dramatically different level. This is why Viktor Frankl, the Viennese psychiatrist who survived the Nazi concentration camps and wrote one of the most important books of the 20th century, concluded that the primary human drive is not pleasure or power, but meaning. Prisoners in the camps who found a reason, any reason, to keep going survived at higher rates than those who did not because the reason made their conditions less terrible, because the reason made their minds more resilient, more resourceful, and more capable of navigating extremity without breaking. Purpose is the concentrated form of meaning, and meaning, it turns out, is not a luxury. It is a biological and psychological necessity for functioning at full capacity. Now, I want to be honest with you about something, because a great deal of confusion exists around the concept of purpose, and that confusion keeps many people from either finding theirs or acting on it. The first confusion is that purpose must be grand and world-changing to be real. This is not true. Purpose is not measured by its scale. It is measured by its resonance, by the degree to which it connects your deepest capacities, your deepest values, and your deepest sense of what matters into a unified direction. Some people's purposes are genuinely world-scale. Most are not. Most purposes operate in the sphere of family, community, craft, relationship, and local contribution. And they are no less legitimate, no less powerful, and no less capable of generating extraordinary transformation for being so. The second confusion is that purpose must be discovered before it can be pursued. This is not true either. In my experience, purpose is more often built than found. It emerges through action, through experiment, through the process of doing things and noticing which ones light you up versus which ones drain you. Waiting to find your purpose before you start moving is like waiting to know where the road goes before you take the first step. The road reveals itself through walking. The third confusion is that purpose must be a single, definitive answer, a calling so clear and unmistakable that once you find it, every decision becomes obvious. Reality is more nuanced. Purpose evolves. The thing that calls you at 30 is often related to but different from the thing that calls you at 50. The expression of purpose changes as you develop, as your capacities grow, and as your understanding of what you have to offer becomes more refined. The core, the deepest layer of what genuinely matters to you, tends to be consistent. The expression of it tends to be dynamic. With those clarifications in place, let me introduce a framework for understanding purpose that I have found to be both practically useful and deeply honest. I call it the intersection framework. It asks you to locate the intersection of three domains: what you are naturally drawn toward, what you are unusually capable of, and what the world genuinely needs from you. The first domain, what you are naturally drawn toward, is not about what you think you should care about, or what would make you look good, or what your parents wished you had pursued. It is about what actually holds your attention without effort, what you read about voluntarily, talk about enthusiastically, return to compulsively. What activities cause you to lose track of time? What problems you find yourself wanting to solve, even when nobody is asking you to. This domain contains important information about your genuine wiring, the directions in which your natural curiosity and energy want to flow. The second domain, what you are unusually capable of, is not necessarily what you are most trained in or most credentialed for. It is often something that feels so natural to you that you have trouble believing it is special. It is the thing people come to you for, the way you see problems that others miss, the quality of your listening, your creativity, your analysis, your ability to connect with people, your capacity for precision, your gift for synthesis. Your natural gifts are often invisible to you precisely because they come so easily. They are, paradoxically, the things most worth developing. The third domain, what the world genuinely needs from you, asks you to lift your gaze from your own development and place it in relationship to others. What is actually missing in the lives of the people around you that you have something real to offer? Not what the market trends say, not what is most profitable right now, but what genuine deficit or hunger exists among the people you are best positioned to serve, and what do you have from your unique combination of experience, capacity, and perspective that could genuinely address it? Where these three domains intersect is where your purpose lives, and where your purpose lives is where the sleeping giant is most fully awake. I want to tell you about a man named James who spent 17 years in corporate finance and was, by every external measure, successful. He was well compensated, well respected, and profoundly unfulfilled. Not dramatically, not in a way that was obvious to others, but in the quiet, persistent way that reveals itself in the Sunday evening dread, the growing cynicism, the sense that the best of yourself is not being used. James had always been drawn to education. As a child, he had been the kid who helped other kids understand the math problems. As an adult, he was the person colleagues came to when they needed complex financial information, explained clearly and practically. His natural gift was translation, the ability to take complicated ideas and make them genuinely accessible to people who were intimidated by them. What the world needed from him? It turned out to be financial literacy. Specifically, financial literacy for communities that had historically been locked out of wealth-building knowledge. James grew up in one of those communities. He knew firsthand what it cost people to navigate a financial world that assumed a baseline of knowledge they had never been given. The intersection of his attraction, his capability, and the world's genuine need pointed in a clear direction. And once he allowed himself to see it, really see it rather than dismiss it as impractical, the energy that had been quietly draining into resignation for 17 years turned itself loose in a single definite direction. James did not quit his job overnight. He did not blow up his life in a grand gesture. He started small, teaching a free workshop on Saturday mornings at his local library. 6 people attended the first one. By the third month, the room was standing room only, and a local nonprofit had offered to fund the program's expansion. Within 2 years, James had built an organization that had reached thousands of families. Within 4 years, he had left his corporate position entirely to run the organization full-time, earning less than he had in finance, but feeling more alive than he had in 2 decades, not because his purpose was more important than other people's, because it was genuinely his, and genuinely his is the only kind that wakes the giant. There is a dimension of purpose that I need to address because it is one of the most commonly misunderstood aspects of this subject, the relationship between purpose and discipline. Many people believe, and the culture reinforces this, that discipline is the source of consistent action, that if you just had more self-control, more willpower, more ability to force yourself through resistance, you would finally achieve the things you have been trying to achieve. This is, in my experience, largely wrong. Discipline in the absence of purpose is exhausting and unsustainable. It is the experience of pushing yourself toward something that has no deep magnetic pull, relying entirely on the finite resource of willpower, which depletes with use. Every act of forced discipline in an unaligned direction costs you something that is not easily replenished. Purpose-aligned action, by contrast, is self-fueling. When what you are doing is genuinely connected to who you are and why you are here, the experience of effort changes. It is still effort. Purpose does not eliminate difficulty, and anyone who tells you otherwise is selling something. But it is effort that feels worthwhile. It is resistance that, when you push through it, leaves you more alive rather than more depleted. It is work in the deepest sense of that word, the work that only you can do, that needs doing, and that the world is quietly waiting for you to begin. This does not mean that purpose always feels obvious or that following it is always joyful. There are days when even the most purpose-aligned work feels heavy, frustrating, or unclear. The difference is not the absence of those difficult days. It is what they feel like they are in service of. A difficult day in an aligned direction feels like growing pains. A difficult day in an unaligned direction feels like evidence that you are in the wrong place. If you have been in the wrong place, if the difficulty in your life has been feeling like evidence rather than growing pains, this chapter is an invitation not to blow up your life, to begin with honesty and curiosity, asking the question that most adults have been too afraid to ask directly. What is this life actually for? What am I here to do? Not in the cosmic sense, necessarily. In the practical, personal, actionable sense. What direction, if I followed it fully, would make the best use of everything I am? The sleeping giant has a direction. It has always had a direction, and part of what has kept it asleep is the accumulated weight of other people's directions, the expectations you absorbed, the paths you followed to please others, the goals you adopted because they seemed reasonable rather than because they were yours. Purpose is the compass that belonged to you all along. In the next chapter, we will talk about how to use it, daily, practically, and with the kind of disciplined consistency that turns inner transformation into outer results that you can actually see and touch. One final thought before we move forward. There is an old question that philosophers and teachers have asked for centuries, and that I think is worth sitting with tonight, in the quiet before sleep. The question is this: if you knew you could not fail, and your current responsibilities were fully handled, and you had complete freedom to direct your time and energy, what would you do? The answer to that question is not a fantasy. It is a compass reading. Keep it close. I want to give you one more framework before we move into the final chapter, one that I have found to be both practically grounding and profoundly motivating for people who are in the earlier stages of clarifying their purpose. I call it the 3 horizons of purpose, and it addresses one of the most paralyzing aspects of purpose seeking, the gap between where you are now and where you sense you are meant to go. The first horizon is what I call the present purpose. This is the meaning that is available to you right now, in your current circumstances, with your current resources and relationships. Every person, regardless of how far they feel from their ultimate direction, has a present purpose, a way of contributing, growing, and serving that is available today. It might be as immediate as being fully present in your parenting. It might be as specific as developing a skill that will eventually become central to your larger work. The present purpose is not a consolation prize. It is where all transformation begins. If you cannot find meaning in the small, you will be unable to sustain the large. The second horizon is the emerging purpose. This is the direction you sense yourself being called toward, the work that lights you up when you contemplate it, the problem you find yourself wanting to solve, the contribution you can feel at the edges of your current capacity. The emerging purpose may not yet be fully formed or fully clear. That is expected. The horizon exists to be walked toward, not to be grasped from a distance. Your job with the emerging purpose is to move closer to it every day, through small experiments, through conversations, through research, through the patient practice of following your genuine curiosity wherever it leads. The third horizon is the ultimate purpose, the fullest expression of your gifts in service of what matters most to you. This horizon is the most distant, and it is the one that most people either fixate on prematurely or dismiss as unrealistic. The healthy relationship with the ultimate purpose is to hold it as a direction rather than a destination, to let it inform your choices without demanding immediate arrival. The ultimate purpose is not where you are going, it is what you are becoming capable of contributing. At any given moment in your life, you can find yourself somewhere in the relationship between these three horizons. The key insight is that you do not need to have arrived at the third horizon to begin living purposefully. Purpose is not a destination, it is a posture. The posture of someone who is oriented, moving, and paying attention to the direction their genuine gifts and the world's genuine needs are pointing together. The sleeping giant, when fully awake, lives at all three horizons simultaneously, present in the moment, moving toward the emerging edge, and shaped by the distant pull of the ultimate direction. That three-horizon awareness is itself a form of aliveness that most people never experience, and it is available to you, beginning with the next decision you make about where to put your attention. The daily practice, keeping the giant awake. Everything in the previous 4 chapters has been building toward this, the daily practice, because here is the hard truth about awakening the sleeping giant. The awakening is not a single event. It is not a retreat weekend, a breakthrough moment, or a life-changing conversation, though all of those things can be catalysts. The awakening is a daily choice, made again and again, to do the small, specific, consistent things that keep the inner architecture of your mind aligned with the outer life you are building. It is the practice, not the peak experience, that creates lasting transformation. Most people who pursue personal growth make a mistake that I want to help you avoid. They go looking for the insight, the single idea, the perfect framework, the transformative realization, and then wait for the insight to change their life. But insights are not self-executing. They require action, and the action must be consistent enough, over enough time, to actually reorganize the neural architecture that is running the show. The research on behavior change, habit formation, and neuroplasticity all points to the same fundamental conclusion. The brain changes through repetition over time, not through intensity alone, not through a single dramatic experience, through the daily, patient, deliberate practice of being the person you are becoming over enough days and weeks and months for the new neural pathways to become genuinely default. This is both humbling and empowering. Humbling because it means there are no shortcuts, no matter how appealing they look. Empowering because it means the transformation you are seeking is available to anyone who is willing to show up consistently, regardless of their starting point, their background, or the disadvantages they have been handed. In this final chapter, I am going to give you a daily practice, a set of specific disciplines organized around the 5 core domains we have covered in this book. These disciplines are designed to be done in sequence, ideally in the morning, before the day's demands begin to compete for your attention. The full practice takes between 30 and 45 minutes. It is not complex. It is not dramatic. It is simply the most concentrated form of giant awakening work I have found, applied consistently over time. The first discipline is what I call the morning declaration. This is a 3 to 5 minute practice in which you speak aloud, actually speak, not just think. A clear statement of who you are becoming, not who you wish you were, not who you will be someday. Who you are, becoming right now, in this season of your life. This declaration addresses all 3 domains of identity we discussed: your worthiness, your direction, and your relational self. An example might sound something like this. I am a person who builds wealth with intention and generosity. I bring my full capacity to every important relationship in my life. I am becoming more courageous, more clear, and more useful every day. My purpose is real, and I pursue it with consistent action. The specific words matter less than 2 things. that the words are genuinely yours and that you feel something when you say them. If you are reciting words that produce no response in your body, the words are not yet aligned with your genuine direction. Keep refining them until saying them produces a quiet, grounded activation. The felt sense that this is real and this is mine. The reason this practice matters neurologically is that the brain responds to language differently when that language is spoken aloud versus when it is merely thought. Speaking activates the auditory cortex, which deepens neural encoding, and speaking while standing, which I recommend, engages the body in a way that reinforces the identity being declared. You are not just thinking a new story, you are inhabiting it. The second discipline is belief auditing. This is a 5 to 10-minute journaling practice designed to surface and examine the limiting beliefs that are most active in your current life. The practice is simple. At the top of a blank page, write the area of your life you most want to transform: your finances, your health, your most important relationship, your career, your sense of self-worth. Then write quickly, without editing, every thought that arises when you contemplate that area. Do not try to write positive thoughts. Write honest thoughts. If what comes is, "I will never have enough money," write that. If what comes is, "I always eventually destroy my good relationships," write that. If what comes is, "I am too old to start over," write that. These are the thoughts that are actually running in the background of your mind in this area. You need to see them to change them. Once you have written them, do something simple but powerful. Next to each one, write where this thought came from, not in a blaming way, in an archaeological way. Was it a parent, a teacher, an early failure that was interpreted as proof of a permanent limitation? A cultural message you absorbed without questioning? Trace the thought back to its origin and recognize that its origin is not the same as its truth. Then, for each limiting belief, write one sentence that is both more empowering and genuinely credible to you. Not a positive affirmation that your mind will immediately reject as wishful thinking, a statement that is directionally better and realistically possible. "I will never have enough money" might become, "I am developing the skills and awareness to build consistent financial stability." The shift does not have to be from scarcity to abundance in a single step. It has to be from stuck to moving. Over weeks and months of this practice, you will notice two things. The limiting beliefs gradually lose their grip as you repeatedly expose them to consciousness and reframe them. And new limiting beliefs will surface to be worked through, which is a sign of progress, not regression. The mind continues to reveal its layers as you develop the capacity to handle each one. The third discipline is purpose alignment check. This is a 5-minute practice, ideally sitting in stillness with your eyes closed. It begins with one question, asked sincerely and listened to patiently. Is what I am spending my time on aligned with what I am here to do? This is not a productivity question. It is not asking whether you are being efficient. It is asking whether your life's daily texture is oriented toward the intersection we discussed in the previous chapter, the place where your attractions, your capabilities, and the world's genuine needs meet. Most of us, if we are honest, will find areas of significant misalignment. The majority of our time goes to obligations, habits, and commitments that have very little to do with our genuine direction. This is not a reason for despair. It is information, and it can be used gradually and strategically to make the small adjustments that, over time, shift the balance meaningfully. You cannot, in most cases, immediately reorganize your life around your purpose. You have responsibilities that matter and obligations that are real. What you can do is take one small daily action that is oriented toward your purpose, not a big action, a consistent one. The question the purpose alignment check is really asking is, did I take that small action yesterday? And if not, what is today's action? Consistency of small action is the engine of purpose-driven change. It is far more powerful than the occasional grand gesture, and it is available every single day, regardless of your circumstances. The fourth discipline is what I call the gratitude and evidence practice. This is a 5-minute practice that serves two distinct functions simultaneously. The first function is neurological. Gratitude activates the brain's reward circuitry and produces a brief but genuine elevation in mood, cognitive flexibility, and energy. Doing it deliberately at the start of each day gives you the neurological conditions most conducive to effective decision-making for the hours that follow. The second function is the more important one for our purposes here. It is evidence gathering for your new identity. Every day, you write down 3 pieces of evidence that confirm you are the person you declared yourself to be in the morning declaration. Not achievements, evidence. The moment you chose patience when your old self would have reacted, the choice you made that the new you would make. The small act of courage, generosity, integrity, or discipline that the person you are becoming would do, and that you actually did. This is the mechanism through which new identity becomes real. The brain updates its self-image through evidence, not intention. Every piece of evidence you record is a deposit into the account of your new identity. Over time, those deposits accumulate into something that feels genuinely stable, a new sense of self that does not require constant effort to maintain because it has been built brick by brick through lived experience. The fifth and final daily discipline is what I call the evening integration. This is a 10-minute practice done at the end of the day, before sleep. Sleep is, among its many functions, a period of memory consolidation, a time when the brain processes the day's experiences and encodes them into long-term memory. What you put into your mind in the hour before sleep has an outsized influence on what gets encoded and how. This is well established in sleep research, and it is one of the most underutilized tools for conscious personal development. The evening integration has 3 parts. The first is a review of the day's alignment. Where did I act like the person I am becoming? Where did I revert to old patterns? This is not self-criticism. It is honest assessment, the kind that generates useful information rather than self-punishment. The second part is a brief visioning practice. Spend 3 to 4 minutes vividly imagining the life you are building in as much sensory and emotional detail as you can access. Not the mechanics, the feeling. What does it feel like to be the person who has fully woken the giant? What does Tuesday morning feel like when your work is genuinely aligned with your purpose? What does it feel like to stand in a relationship where you are fully seen and genuinely valued? These felt sense visualizations, practiced just before sleep, provide the subconscious mind with a clear target to work toward during the consolidation processes of the night. The third part is the simplest, a statement of intention for tomorrow. One clear, specific intention, not a to-do list. One thing that, if you do it tomorrow, will move the needle meaningfully on the most important transformation you are currently working on. Write it down. Speak it aloud. Let it be the last purposeful thought in your conscious mind before sleep. These 5 disciplines, practiced daily, create something that is more than the sum of their parts. They create a continuous feedback loop between who you are becoming, how you are spending your time, and how you are interpreting your experience. Over weeks and months, this loop reorganizes everything, not through the drama of sudden change, but through the quiet, cumulative power of a mind that is consistently oriented in the right direction. I want to address one more thing before we bring this book to its close, and it may be the most important thing of all. Every person who has ever made a genuine, lasting transformation from a smaller version of themselves to a larger one has encountered what I call the valley between identities. It is the period, it can last weeks, months, sometimes longer, that comes after you have genuinely committed to becoming someone new, but before that new identity feels stable, and before the outer results have caught up with the inner change. In the valley, the old identity no longer feels fully like yours, but the new one does not yet feel fully real. You are in between, aware enough to feel the limitation of who you were, but not yet far enough along to feel the full solidity of who you are becoming. This valley is deeply uncomfortable. It produces doubt, impatience, and sometimes the temptation to retreat to the familiar. The valley is also, without exception in my experience, the place where the transformation is doing its deepest work. Marcus, whom you met in Chapter 1, spent 4 months in the valley. Diana, from Chapter 2, spent 6. Simone, from Chapter 3, spent almost a year. James, from Chapter 4, spent 2.5 years. In every case, the length of the valley had nothing to do with the magnitude of the eventual transformation. In every case, the people who crossed the valley did so not through dramatic heroics, but through showing up, doing the practice, and trusting the process, even when the process felt invisible. The sleeping giant does not wake all at once. It stirs, it stretches, it opens one eye, then the other. The light is strange at first. The world looks different from this height. There are adjustments to make, old habits to release, relationships that will renegotiate themselves in response to who you are becoming. But when the giant is finally fully awake, when the operating system has been genuinely updated, when the identity has genuinely shifted, when the purpose is genuinely being pursued, the experience of being alive changes in a way that is difficult to describe. To someone who has not yet known it, it is not that problems disappear. Problems do not disappear. It is that they look different to someone who is operating from their full capacity. They look smaller, more manageable, more interesting. They look like the terrain of a life that is actually being lived rather than watched from the sidelines. That is what is waiting for you on the other side of this work. Not a perfect life, a full one, not the absence of challenge, the presence of genuine aliveness, not the end of struggle, the beginning of struggle that is in service of something worth struggling for. The sleeping giant inside you is not a fantasy. It is not a metaphor for potential you will never access. It is the actual you, the version of you that has been present, breathing, and available this entire time, waiting patiently beneath the weight of everything that was placed on top of it before you were old enough to choose otherwise. The work of this book, of this life, is simply this: lift the weight, one layer at a time, do the daily practice, trust the process, cross the valley, wake the giant. The world has been waiting long enough. A final word on consistency. I want to address something practical, because I have watched too many people leave the experience of a book like this, feeling genuinely moved and genuinely motivated, and then watch that motivation gradually dissolve back into the familiar patterns of daily life within a few weeks. This is not a failure of character. It is a failure of system, and systems are fixable. The single most important structural decision you can make to support the daily practice is this: decide when and where you will do it, and make that decision once so that you do not have to make it again each day. Research on habit formation consistently shows that the strongest predictor of whether a behavior will persist is not motivation. It is the degree to which the behavior is linked to a specific, consistent context, same time, same place, same sequence. The brain learns to prepare for the practice before you consciously decide to begin it, which eliminates the moment-to-moment friction that gradually erodes most good intentions. Decide now, before you put this book down, before the energy of this final chapter dissipates into the ordinary noise of your day. When will you do the practice? Where will you sit? What will you have available? A notebook? A pen? A quiet environment? What will signal its beginning? What will signal its end? These are logistical questions, and they may seem unworthy of a chapter that has been speaking about identity and purpose and the awakening of the human giant. But I have seen enough transformation, and enough failure to transform, to know that the distance between an inspired reader and a changed person is almost always navigated or not navigated in exactly these ordinary logistical decisions. The giant wakes up in the logistics. It wakes up in the Tuesday morning when you keep the appointment with yourself that you made the Sunday before, even though you are tired, even though the coffee has not fully taken effect, even though nothing feels particularly inspired. That Tuesday morning, that ordinary, unremarkable, completely undramatic act of showing up for yourself is the practice, not the peak moment, not the breakthrough, the Tuesday morning. You will have thousands of Tuesday mornings between now and the life you are building. They are all available to you. They are all waiting. Begin with the next one. The long game. Everything in this book has been pointing toward a single, simple, life-changing truth. Transformation is not an event. It is a direction, and the direction is chosen, rechosen, and chosen again. Every morning, in every decision, through every setback and every breakthrough, for as long as you are alive. There will be mornings when the practice feels hollow and the declarations feel like wishful thinking. There will be weeks when the evidence refuses to cooperate and the old identity seems to reassert itself with embarrassing ease. There will be moments when the valley we discussed seems wider than you remembered and the other side more distant. These are not signs that the work is not working. They are the texture of the work. They are, in fact, precisely the moments when the practice is most important, not because it will immediately lift your mood or sharpen your clarity, but because doing it anyway is the act that most powerfully reinforces the identity you are building. The person who practices only when they feel like it is not building a new identity. They are performing one when the conditions are favorable. The person who practices, regardless of how they feel, who keeps the appointment with themselves, even when nothing about the morning is cooperating, is doing something profoundly different. They are demonstrating to their own subconscious mind, through the undeniable evidence of repeated action, that this is who they actually are, not who they aspire to be on good days, who they are. That demonstration, accumulated over months and years, is what changes the operating system. That is what wakes the giant and keeps it awake. Not inspiration, not insight, not the perfect circumstances, just you, showing up for yourself again and again and again, until the new architecture is so thoroughly built that it no longer requires effort to maintain, until it simply becomes the foundation from which your life is lived. That day comes. It comes for everyone who persists. And when it arrives, it does not announce itself with fanfare. It arrives quietly, in the middle of an ordinary moment. A decision made without the usual second-guessing, a conversation held with an ease that used to require effort, a challenge met with the steady resourcefulness of someone who knows they have what it takes. You will notice it and smile because you will recognize it for what it is, the giant, fully awake, finally, irrevocably, magnificently awake. That is what is waiting. Go and get it. One final thought. The moment you finished this book, something already began. You may not feel it yet. You may not see the evidence of it. But the decision to take this material seriously, to sit with it, to apply it, to return to it, is itself an act of the giant stirring. Do the daily practice, not perfectly, consistently. The gap between where you are and where you are capable of being is not closed in a single effort. It is closed in the accumulated weight of daily choices, made one at a time, over enough time. You already have everything you need. You always have. The work now is simply to remember. Wake the giant.